Ja, herzlich willkommen, sehr verehrte
Warm
Damen.
welcome, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Federal Foundation for the Study of the Communist Dictatorship in Eastern Germany and the Government Commissioner for the New Federal States, to the eighth discussion in our series on transitional justice. We are dealing with different processes of transitional justice after war and tyranny. We compare different countries in this series. My name is Tamina Kutscher, and I accompany you through this series, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the platform decoder.org, which is a media and scientific platform on Russia and Belarus. And before I come to our tonight's topic, I would like to say a few words about something else. While we are sitting here tonight and while we are talking, in the center of Europe, a war is taking place, an attack of Russia against Ukraine. In this series, we just recently in December talked about Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. And I think that none of us would have thought then that today we would be in a completely different world and that we would be living under such horrible conditions. There's war in Ukraine, a war that was launched by Russia. In Russia, yesterday, it was announced that the human rights organization Memorial International was liquidated. Thousands were arrested after protesting against the war. In Belarus, a constitutional referendum took place at the weekend, which also led to the liquidation of the military neutral status of Belarus, which means that from now on, Russian troops can be deployed in Belarus also for a longer term, including also nuclear weapons. There were protests in Minsk and other Belarusian towns and cities at the weekend. However, they were also stopped very briefly. And that is why right at the beginning, also on behalf of the Federal Foundation for the Study of the Communist Dictatorship, I would like to express our full solidarity with Ukraine and all Ukrainians, and also with those people in Russia and Belarus who are so brave in their strict regimes to stand up and to go to the streets and protest against this war. It is necessary to be brave, to stand up against such people, against such actions. These are two sides of one medal: aggression to the outside and to the inside also. And we have been talking about this earlier. The fear of a democratic society, the fear of an honest coming to terms with one's own history. What this all can lead to is what we can witness at the moment in Ukraine, which brings us back to our tonight's topic, which is the necessity of transitional justice, processes of coming to terms with one's own history. Ladies and gentlemen, after these introductory words, I would like to come to the topic of our tonight's discussion. It is our eighth discussion, and we want to talk about violence and resistance, about the truth commissions in Latin America. The history of Latin America in the 20th century was characterized by the establishment of dictatorial regimes, civil wars, and also a large amount of political violence. In the 80s and 90s, many states returned to democracy and were confronted with their violent past, and also with the demand of the civil society, the demand for truth and justice. Tonight, we want to talk about processes of coping with one's past, which were launched despite judicial ways back, despite amnesty laws. We want to talk about three countries, about Argentina, Colombia, and Chile. And questions we want to talk about tonight are, for example, how do the attempts to come to terms with one's past reflect on the establishment of democracy. What does the right to truth mean for perpetrators, for victims, and for the whole society? Which role do truth commissions play? And I would like to welcome warmly my three wonderful speakers tonight, whom I am going to introduce one after the other. This is what is so great about Zoom. We had to get used to this way of meeting during the pandemic, but it makes it possible for us to meet tonight and to talk with one another. I would like to welcome warmly Jimena Göke. She is going to speak from Chile. Jimena Göke Saavedra is a historian and a teacher of history and English. She is a feminist and a human rights activist. At the moment, she is writing her thesis in literature. She focuses on autobiography, testimonial literature, body and gender studies, political sexual violence, processes of memory, and also Jewish and Holocaust literature. Apart from that, she has been dealing with dictatorship and the transfer to the democracy in Chile, but also in Uruguay, and also on the Holocaust and the Jewish diaspora. And she's working as a freelance author and translator. Works in the field of education. As you can see, there are a lot of things she's dealing with, and we are very much looking forward to your statement. Warm welcome, Jimena Göke. Next, I would like to introduce and welcome warmly Salome Grunblatt from Argentina. Salome Grunblatt is the Director for Institutional Relations in the Museo Sitio de Memoria, ESMA, in Buenos Aires. A very interesting institution, which we will surely hear about tonight. Salome Grunblatt studied sociology at the University of Buenos Aires, international relations with focus on the Middle East in London, and political science and international relations at the Universidad de Argentina. She had been working for Parliament and for the Chamber of Deputies of the National Congress of Argentina as a consultant with focus on gender and legislation. A warm welcome, Salome. And from Colombia, I would like to welcome very warmly Maria Alonso Gamboa. Welcome, Maria. Maria is a journalist with focus on international cooperation and development. She studied journalism and communication, and in her master thesis, which is especially interesting for us tonight, she dealt with a project about the disarming and mobilizing illegal armed groups. For many years, she had been working project work. She's a communication expert, and she worked for different NGOs. For example, the Spanish Red Cross. She was also a consultant at the Colombian Ministry of Interior and dealt with other issues. She's also active in an NGO, Asodamas de Colombia, an NGO that supports and empowers women, helps them to organize in their local contexts. I am sure that we are going to talk about that in more detail tonight. Welcome, Maria. Welcome again to all of you. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. I would like to start with Argentina. In Argentina, there was a military dictatorship from 1976 till 83. And according to human rights organizations, the army and the police kidnapped very many people officially registered. There are 13,000 victims. They were brought to camps. There were tortures. Many of those disappeared. Were killed. Then there was the military defeat during the Falkland War, and that marked the switch to democracy in 1983, when the first free elections took place. The Argentinian people elected Alfonso, and then a process started, and you, Salome, wrote as a statement in which you say, in our country, the issues of memory, truth, and justice have become a matter of public policy. The sanction through judicial processes of those responsible for the atrocities committed during the dictatorship is part of the consensus reached by our society and the state in order to build a strong and long-lasting democracy. End of quote. Salome, my first question to you is, what happened since 1983? And what did the way towards the consensus look like? I'm sure it was not a straight and easy way, was it?
No, it wasn't. Thank you for the warm welcome. As for your question, well, this process, since we are going to be discussing processes today, was inaugurated, as you said, with the return of democracy, and it led to the creation of public policy regarding memory and aim at effectively enforcing the rights to truth, justice, reparation, and to also prevent the reoccurrence of these violations of human rights. But it's been a process not without setbacks. So it had its ups and downs, but until now, in this brief 40-year period of democracy, which is actually the longest democracy we've had in our country since its birth, we've learned to build both our administrations and our society's consensus to reach those to reach justice, to attain justice. And I think it's important to highlight that what happened in our country led to the creation of many institutions within our state, regardless of the administration, regardless of the political party that's ruling, that have become stronger and stronger as time goes by. But still, there are still some issues that need to be paid attention to, and they have to do with the way the justice process takes place. Because you know that justice has different times and time frames than what society is required. So sometimes trials take longer and than people expect. So the importance here is that there are governments, there are public institutions that are there to ensure that these processes continue in time and they are not stopped or delayed. That when we talk, that is specifically talking about the justice process. That, as you may know, it's a process of transitional justice. As for the place where I work, and it has to do with what I want to make a point of.
Entschuldigung,
yes.
Salome, bevor wir weitergehen.
Sorry, Salome, before we go on, we will come back
Yes.
to the institution. And you mentioned the importance of institutions. We will come back to that. But let me go back, because we are talking to a German audience, which is maybe not that familiar with your history. Which measures were taken, which precise measures would you say today led to this consensus, to the strong consensus today?
Well, in 1984, you know that, as you said, the the dictatorship lasted 7 years, from 1976 to 1983. In 1984, a commission was formed. It was the commission to investigate the disappearance of many thousands of people in our country during the dictatorship. And they did a very thorough research, which ended up becoming this publication that was called Never Again, Nunca Más in Spanish. And this publication was the stepping stone on which the rest of the institutions, so the government institutions, were able to start these processes to attain memory, justice, and truth. So in 1985, we had our first court trials where the highest ranks of the military were judged for the crimes that had been committed. And they were imprisoned. But shortly after, there were the society was still not, had still not reached that consensus. There were still these groups that had lots of power, especially within the military, that were pushing for amnesty and different means to be absolved and not to be pursued in a court of justice. So two pieces of legislation were created that wouldn't allow the lower ranks in the military to be judged, and that lasted for very long. It wasn't until 2004 that this was reviewed, and then finally in 2005 these laws were vetoed, and the processes and the justice could restart and justice and our judicial system could move over and move along to trial, to put these people on trial, to put the perpetrators on trial. So it's been a struggle. It was not without struggle, but the thing is, we have a very strong connection to human rights movements here in Argentina. So mothers of Plaza de Mayo, abuelas de Plaza de Mayo, and hijos, which are the sons and daughters of those who disappeared, have created these very unique and strong organizations that who led and still lead the population towards those struggles, the struggle for memory and truth and justice. And it's because of them that the different administrations were forced to implement the right measures to make sure that justice would be delivered.
Sie sprechen schon die besondere.
Great. You're talking about the special role of the mothers. That's so interesting about our panel today, that you all also include this gender aspects, and that's why I have a special question on that. In all this process of dealing with the past, you mentioned already the importance of civil society organizations who played an important role in this context. So how would you concretely describe the role of the women, of the mothers, for this process of the dealing with the past? How important was the role of the women?
It's fundamental, because even though, of course, there were men involved, there were fathers and relatives involved, they were the they were the first and the main actors in these developments. So There's a word that defines what they did. It's social maternity. It's social motherhood. It's the way they turned their their pain and their struggle for the search of their kids into a social matter, and they looked for ways to involve the entire community, not only in our country but also abroad, because as we were they didn't start looking for their children once democracy was restored. They started right away. And public gatherings were forbidden. People couldn't meet in public places in large groups. So they would gather in Plaza de Mayo, which is like our main square in Buenos Aires, and it's right in front of Casa Rosada, which is the House of Government, where the president works. It's the main office. And since they couldn't gather there, they would circle, they would keep walking around a monument so that they wouldn't be detained by the police, because public gatherings were forbidden, so they would walk in circles. And that became, after so many years, in a sort of a ceremony. Those walks in Plaza de Mayo still take place every week until now. It hasn't stopped. It only stopped during the pandemics for the past 2 years, but they resumed it as soon as they could. And we're talking about women who are already 80, 90 years old, and they're still there fighting for not only for their children, but also for social justice and all those things that they believe their children were fighting for, or believe they were the most important things to fight for. So it's very important that you mentioned this thing about gender, because yes, it was, and it's still women who decided to go out and speak up, even though they knew it was dangerous. Some mothers, some founding mothers, were also disappeared. Once they started going out and organizing, they were abducted and tortured and murdered.
Mhm. Mhm. Ja,
but
vielen
still
Dank,
that
Salome.
yeah, that didn't stop them.
Sagen Sie noch fertig. Mhm. Ja, vielen Dank, Salome, für diese ersten.
Thank you so much, Salome, for these first insights to Argentina. I want to have a short insight into each country, and then we're going to have a more general talk. So I would move on to Chile now, if that's fine. And the gender aspect will follow us, of course. If we talk about Chile now, the difference is in Argentina, it was the military defeat of the War of the Malvinas, which produced this final collapse of this military government. In Chile, it was different. The way back to democracy actually started through negotiations between the military and civil society forces. It was 17 years which Augusto Pinochet was in power in the dictatorship in Chile, which belonged to the most bloody ones and the most brutal ones. Tens of thousands of people were disappeared, were tortured, were killed, and in 1990, then the democratically elected successor created the so-called Truth Commission, a commission which was supposed to deal with reconciliation and truth and justice, and which in 2003 was reinstated again with a novelty that they don't only deal with victims who had died, but also with affected by torture and prosecution. So Ximena said, and let me quote, The truth commissions in Chile were necessary as a symbolic and political tool. However, they did not produce a closure as expected. There are still claims of justice, truth, and non-repetition guarantees, as shown neatly by the demands raised at the public hearings at the current Constituent Convention. End of the quotation. So talk about two important points. One is the Truth Commission and the current Constituent Convention. And I would first like to talk about the Truth Commissions. As we said, the Commission in Chile not only had the objective to find truth, but also national reconciliation. They wanted to avoid a divide of the society. So what would you say today? Up to which point this was successful? You said in a way it was not successful. It didn't end up with a closure. But why wasn't that possible, according to you?
Okay. First of all, thanks for the invitation. I'm glad to be here. And I think that it is important to understand that when we talk about truth commissions, there are 5 main points that is necessary to highlight. The first one, of course, is that when we talk about truth commissions, we talk about searching for a truth or establishing a truth. Then it is necessary to talk about justice, reparation, the way that we try to deal with the victims, and finally, guarantees of non-repetition. All of them, nevertheless, are somehow affected by a political dimension, about like the way that the relationship between all the forces, the political forces in government and in the opposition are relating themselves at the time that the Commission of Truth is set. And also the actors involved. And I think that this is very important to understand what happened in Chile. The first Truth Commission was established in 1990, immediately after the end of the dictatorship. And the president was a president that during the Popular Unity government was totally opposed to any kind of conversation with the government in office. So he was even one of the leaders of calling for the coup d'etat. And that is very important because the moment that he reaches the government at the end of the dictatorship, he sets a lot of conditions to this Truth Commission that emphasizes mostly what he calls reconciliation. But this reconciliation, for example, if we talk about truth, was based in a limited truth. And this is very important because just like happened in Argentina, for example, in the first years after the dictatorship, there was a moment that it was declared that there were 2 parts that were equally guilty. What in Argentina they call the theory of the 2 evils. And that is not right. Not for Argentina, but especially not for Chile, because we are talking about a government that was elected and that had a growing support the moment of the coup d'etat. And this government was, there were a lot of efforts to throw this government out from the very beginning of this government, and even before that. Okay, so according to even reports from the Congress of the United States that have documented, for example, the Church Commission, all the attempts to avoid the election of Allende and to throw him out. So it is very important also to take into consideration that in Chile there were no military groups supporting, apart from the regular army. I mean, there were no other groups around the president that were able to have guns, for example. So this idea that for example, the ones committing the coup d'etat were fighting a war is only a fiction, it's not real. And that is very important, because what they did with this report was to get a right-wing historian into the Truth Commission that wrote a very, very limited truth, which establishes that the coup d'etat was unavoidable, was necessary, and that the responsibility was equal for both sides. Also, this Truth Commission...
Also würden Sie sagen, man hat nicht die Wahrheit gesucht?
So would you say that people were not looking for the truth to reconcile, but just for a compromise? What will you be looking for?
The main objective that had Patricio Aylwin when he established this Truth Commission was to deal with the social pressure. You must understand that this transition didn't begin with the conversation between the opposition and the government. It begins with social mobilization. In 1983, a sequence of protests, of social protests, and even the organization of resistance were growing in the country. So finally, the government decided to deal only with those parties that were close to them, okay? Because the Christian democracy, for example, was a party where no parties were allowed during the dictatorship. But nevertheless, you had some recognized leaders of these parties trying to reorganize and act at the time. So the government decided to start talking with them that, as I said, for example, they supported, most of the Christian democracy parties supported the coup d'etat. Only 12 of its leaders made a kind of declaration rejecting the coup d'etat the day after. All the rest of them supported the government. They were expecting Eduardo Frei, the former Christian Democratic president, to take the office, but that didn't happen. And then they had, of course, some differences when they saw all the brutal repression that the government established over the people and its continuity for 17 years. Of course, they went to the opposition, but they were closer to the government if we talk about the economic thinking, about the political thinking. So it was those groups were included in these conversations for establishing a transitional process. And the emphasis of the Truth Commission was not truth, was reconciliation, and the way that Patricio Aylwin understood reconciliation. For him, it was this like suffocating the social movements, giving something that they need, that they wanted. And during the 17th years of the dictatorship, the recognition of disappearance, of torture, or of executed people as political crimes was denied. So in this Truth Commission, they decided to recognize all of those cases that ended with death. And with that of course was very important for all the families, all the people involved, but that was all. So there was no justice because, as I mentioned, there are 4 elements here. If we talk about truth was limited. And it was something that put somehow in a same level the ones that were persecuted, even with some perpetrators. Because I don't know if you know, but in the Rettig report, the report made by this commission, there are some perpetrators included as victims, which is something that produced a confused concept, because human rights are violated by the state. That is what theory says. And in this case, the report includes a bunch of people that were killed by the resistance. So it makes a continuity in this way of thinking about resistance as a criminal activity, and at the same time, it produces an effect where up until today, there are groups of the right wing that says, for example, when you kick a policeman, you are committing human rights, and that is not true, because it's not the same, you are not in the same level as a civilian than the state, which has all the force, all the ways to control violence and to put a lot of different kinds of violence over your body and over your destiny. So that is the first mistake.
Jimena, ja, nun sagten Sie ja auch eingangs in Ihrem
Jimena, at the beginning in your statement, you said that at the moment there is this constitutional assembly, which again deals with these topics which haven't been finished yet. What would you say? What are the central issues, and which aspects were added which are new today, which were not looked at back then?
Okay, since there was a lack of a deep truth, there was lack of justice, because none of these, not the Rettig report, and of course not the Balek report, which also decided to keep secret for 50 years of all the information gathered about political prison and torture, were committed with real justice. So after all this time, this has produced something that is one of the main purposes of a commission truth. That is, it has avoided the realization of guarantees of non-repetition. So where do you see that? Because for a long time, we have talked, people involved in human rights, in my case, for example, as a historian, as an activist, we have claimed for a long time that there were no conditions of non-repetition, that it is happening this every day, and one day may happen in a more massive way again. It's good for you to know that after 1990, we have 4 people disappear, and we have a lot of claimings of torture, so a lot of continuity. But in 2019, there was a social revolt in Chile, and the government, the president, which is currently in office, that is living in 10 more days, the office, that president said that he was in war against the people. And he put all the militaries and policemen in the streets, and they committed a lot of human rights violations in a range that goes from mutilation of the eyes of a lot of people in demonstrations, sexual political violence, and also a lot of other ways of repression. And these have been denounced by a lot of different institutions inside Chile and abroad. And probably the president is going to be accused in a civilian way afterwards, okay? Because through the political process in Congress, it was not possible. And so when I mentioned this commission created by the constituents, it was an initiative that they created to produce or to allow the popular involvement in the writing of the new constitution. And what they did was opening the doors to people, to organizations, to talk about the topics that they want to be included and considered, and to make a historical balance. And this historical balance, it was very important. It's not a commission of truth, but all the report was gathered and given to institutions of human rights and archives in Chile, and also is the basement for the discussion right now. And it includes, I'm going to end with this, includes
Nein,
not
alles
only
gut. Aber wir sind hier wieder
human
bei der
rights.
Bedeutung der Zivilgesellschaft. Das würde mich an
Yeah.
dieser Stelle
You started to talk about the meaning of the civil society, and actually I'm very much interested in that. Also, after what Salome said, which meaning did the civil society have, and also women? Because,
well, in this case,
we were talking about women also.
The opening of this commission that was called by the constituents, not by the government, okay, not by the Congress. They have gathered information from 280 hearings where people talked about human rights violations during the dictatorship, but also human rights violations up until today. It included not only violations against political prisoners or disappeared during the dictatorship, like the traditional militant victim, but also about indigenous people and all the human rights violations that they have suffered since the colony up until today. They talked about sexual political violence, which is very interesting, and I have worked about that, but it's not interesting only because of that, but because there had been a strong commitment between the struggles of women against all different kinds of violence and the struggle against political, all the ways that violence is used to avoid political involvement of women. And we are not talking only about sexual torture. We are talking about different ways of using gendered tools to control, punish, or take women away of the political involvement. And it includes, for example, policies regarding kids, abortion, or forced pregnancy, of course, sexual torture, but there are other tools. And this has provided, for example, a key element to connect with younger generations. And this was very, very important, for example, in this opportunity, but because there were testimonies talking about sexual political violence then and now in younger generations, in students that are in mobilization. So it is very important that this commission has gathered all this data because it will affect the constitution, but also, and this is very important, I know Salome or Maria Paula are going to agree with me, an archive that for the first time has collected all of these depositions, all of this information.
Ja, wunderbar. Vielen Dank. Vielen
Great.
Dank.
Thank you very much, Jimena, for your insight. Now I would like to go further to Colombia in order to also to compare. In 2016, the Colombian government and the FARC signed a peace treaty after over 50 years of violence that put the end to a conflict in which more than 200,000 people died, 10,000 disappeared. If you look at the peace process in your country, Maria, if you had 3 wishes, what would you wish for this peace process and why?
Hello and good afternoon from Colombia. Good evening in Germany. Thank you first for your invitation. It is an honor to share with you some of the observations about Colombia and the current peace process with the clarification of the facts in the context and the armed conflict, and above all, the institutional and social peace process through the stories of the territories. I work with a social organization that brings together social managers who are mostly wives of and husbands of local rulers and social leaders. Our organization is called Damas de Colombia, and in alliance with the Bundesverband of Putin, please excuse me for my terrible German, we have developed a straightening process on issues of memory and human rights. Today, as you were asking, I will be sharing stories from the other Colombia, the one that is not always visible for all of us, and also some conversations that through my work I have had with women and men victims of the armed conflict in Colombia. Also, if you might excuse me, I will take this license to share my personal opinion, which do not represent in all the aspects the opinion of the entity with I collaborate. Answering your question about the 3 wishes, I wish we have more time for the Commission of Truth, the ability to listen for all the actors, and the own responsibility of the all Colombians. Because I think that not all the Colombians take responsibility for our part in the conflict. We think that because sometimes we didn't had the actions to be the victim or have been victimized by the acts of wars, we don't have responsibility in the full conflict. And that's something that in Colombia we really need to start thinking about.
Und Sie haben es schon angesprochen.
And you mentioned already that in your work, you're working specifically with women and targeting women. Why women? Why is that?
Well, the organization that I work with has committed to empower women through the strengthening of their abilities and work with issues on of their rights and to rebuild the fabric, the social fabric in the territories. So through these years, we are almost 14 years working with women in the rural areas in Colombia and in the more vulnerability places. We have worked with the social leaders to strengthen this development and also to give the voice to the social managers that sometimes work without any resources to improve the life of their communities.
Wir haben es jetzt schon mehrfach gehört, dieses nie wieder, dieses
Oh, we heard it was mentioned already several times, this never again, nunca más, which was mentioned on the first publication, which is such an important point of this transitional justice that really to assure that this will never repeat again. So how about this never again? How is this nunca más in Colombia? How far or how near are you already to really being successful in this thing, never again?
In Colombia, taking responsibility has not been cultural share. The armed conflict has isolated rural areas from the urban areas and particularly has silenced the act of wars by all the actors. This because in some places the same actors has been working together. So and they've been involved in the criminal acts. This destroyed the social fabric and lost confidence and has empowered the loss of confidence between the same inhabitants in the places. I'm sorry for my English. But the social fabric, it has rebuilt through the truth, bring by the truth commissions that seeks to clarify these patterns and explain the causes of the internal armed conflict in Colombia. And that brings the rights of the victims and the society to get the truth for the all actors.
Mhm. Vielen Dank.
Thank you, Maria Paula. It's a special characteristic that the truth commissions and the Latin American processes of transitional justice play such an important role. So I want to ask a question to all the three of you, and I would start with you, Salome. Maybe what means this right to justice? I mean, this is a big philosophical question, I know, but what does it mean for the victims, for the perpetrators, and also for the society in its whole in Argentina?
Well, even though I'm not a legal expert, the right of truth has emerged as one of the pillars in the pursuit of justice by victims, families, and our society as a whole. Nevertheless, the pact of silence that the perpetrators keep until today is still one of the main obstacles that prevents and obstructs the road to closure and total justice for families and victims. As you may know, in our country, there are still at least 300 men and women that who were abducted as babies and their mothers murdered after birth. That suppression of identity of these men and women is a crime that's still happening today. So it even though the dictatorship has ended, there is a crime that's still being committed, and the right of truth, or the right to truth for those men and women is one of the main things that's still to be resolved, even though there is an unmatchable resolve of, as I mentioned before, grandmothers who are still carrying on a very active search of those 300 then babies, now men and women, who still need to get their true identity back.
Und was braucht es?
Yes, I see. So what is needed to be successful on a structural level for that these voices are being heard? What could be done?
Well, the right to truth is based in the fight against impunity, the promotion of peacekeeping, the promotion of human rights, the strengthening of democracy, and our institutions have an obligation towards our societies to pursue that. So even though in the past few years our society has reached a consensus not to let any setback happen. For instance, a few years ago, the Supreme Court ruled a sort of benefit that for one of the perpetrators who was incarcerated, so he could go back to his house earlier than what his sentence stated. So our society massively went out on the streets. Almost 1 million people were out in Plaza de Mayo, the square I mentioned before, saying this is not going to happen. And the Supreme Court had to review the ruling and change it so that perpetrator wouldn't be allowed to leave prison. So as you see, what is needed is both the commitment of our institutions, of the state, of the governments, and of our society. as long as we can keep that thread that joins the community and the government pushing towards the promotion of human rights, the promotion of the policies that sustain the memory, truth, and justice as important things for our societies, we can achieve that. I won't lie to you. There have been times and there have been administrations that have looked to the other side, that haven't tried to deepen, to strengthen the links between the community and the human rights movement, and have even criticized it. But still, 40 years in time, it still has, we still have a long way to go, and we don't, as a community, we cannot take it for granted.
Ja, vielen Dank. Ich will.
Thank you so much. I would take up a question from the chat, which came from the audience, and I would hand that over to you, Jimena. But of course, everybody of you is able to answer on that. So the question is, or the contribution is, there's a lot of talk about justice, and it would be interesting how you would really define justice. So, Jimena, what means justice for you? What would mean justice for the society in Chile?
Okay. First of all, it is important to say that there is a great sensation of impunity in Chile, because there are only a bunch of people that were accused and received some penalties, or that went to prison because of human rights violations, and they were sent to a luxury prison. Yeah, the place where they are is so different than the place that the normal prisoners for different kinds of crimes go in Chile. So this enhances the sensation of impunity and privilege. And also there is another idea connected to this, that justice has come very late. And as I told you, the Rettig report didn't include measures to provide justice. They gave the information to the court, but the court decided not to prosecute the cases because of the amnesty law that the dictatorship itself passed. Afterwards, a judge decided to use a fictional figure, as he has called it, the permanent kidnap, to persecute those involved in disappearances. And also the international pressure, for example, with the case of Letelier, who was killed in United States, or Leighton, that was killed in Italy. That kind of cases started to produce a slow movement in justice, up until the moment Pinochet was taken in London. At that moment, the civil society, again, this is very important in Chile, the social mobilization, started to put claims like 80, 90, 200, 300, a lot of presentations in front of the court demanding justice, because the government decided to protect Pinochet and to bring him back to Chile, saying that he must be judged in Chile. And that never happened. Pinochet died without any kind of sanction. And most of his, the people that collaborated with him are dying without any kind of sanction. So justice in Chile, for some people, it has been provided in the measure that was possible. The sentence that created the president that I mentioned, Patricio Aylwin. But for most of the families, the relatives of victims of this kind of violence, justice has not been a reality. What we have in Chile is impunity, and because justice is not only giving a kind of penalty to those that committed crimes, but also it needs to be done on time. You need to do it when the moment is the right moment, not very late. 60 years after, it's not justice. You are establishing truth, you are giving maybe other kind of resources to the society, but you are not doing what you needed to do. And the courts in Chile have been very, have denied this justice, providing this justice on time to Chilean people. And I think that is very important because, for example, and I end with this idea, a lot of families have received lately some partial truth. For example, they say, yeah, with this process, we have decided that probably your relative was taken out of this secret detention place and killed, but we still don't know who killed them and how and where he is or where she is. Okay, the final destiny of that, the final fate of this person. So they say what we feel is that the government, the courts, are giving us some money to feel quiet, to feel that this has ended. But money is not what they need. In the commission that was created by the constituents, some families said, and it is very, very strong to hear from them saying that they don't want to pass this pain to the next generation. So they need real truth. And that would be justice right now, because the other kind of justice is not possible.
Und gehört zu dieser Gerechtigkeit, also
And does this kind of justice imply, you said a sentence for the perpetrators and the victims have a right to truth. Do they also have a right to reparation, or how can reparation look like?
The victims?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
What the Chilean government has given is a coverage, a health coverage under the price system. And this coverage is equal to the one that receives a person that doesn't have money in the public system. So just like someone that lives in the street, for example, you have free coverage of any kind of thing that you need from the public system, hospitals or primary health. And that has meant also a lot of problems because of the skills of the professionals.
No, I mean, what kind of reparation would be necessary? What could this reparation look like?
Yeah, of course. This what I was mentioning, health is very important because we are talking about a lot of psychological damage, okay? And in this case, there is a lack of, the government offers something, but it's not enough to cover the needs of the relatives, of the families. And even there are a lot of people dying of cancer or having fibromyalgia, when all the body hurts. People that have survived prison and torture, and also their relatives, because of all the damage that this has produced in them. There are studies that talk about that. And reparation also must include health, mental and physical health, because of the traces that repression produced in their bodies. But also, reparation should include not only the monetary compensation is something that the international law has established. And it is very important also because they were not allowed to work, they lose their jobs, or there were a lot of economical effects of what happened. But the main thing that everybody needs. For example, when we talk, there are different groups. When we talk about disappeared people, what the family needs is to know where they are, who are the responsibles for this disappearance, and that would be really meaningful for them. For the rest, political prisoners, women that suffer sexual political violence, exonerated, exiled, that were not touched by any of these commissions, for example. There are other ways that they need reparation, but the state has been reluctant to recognize them and has produced benefits that are very focused and limited in the quality, not only in quantity.
Maria, wir haben eben gehört aus
Maria,
Chile.
now we heard from the Chilean perspective what belongs to justice, the right to know, the right that perpetrators are being punished, and as was also mentioned, a reparation for compensation for different groups of victims. So how would you answer the question, what does justice look like? How would you define justice?
Well, in Colombia, we are new in this process. We don't have as much time as Chile and Argentina in this commission us through. We have another peace process with another armed conflict actors. But what I think, or what I have heard from the victims, is that they just want it closer. As Salome says early, also these closures will bring peace from their communities and for themselves. The justice that they need sometimes are not going to be able to achieve because of Jimena was saying before. But what I have seen in the rural parts of Colombia is that their own communities has had their own process to get that justice and get that peace for their entire towns and municipalities. I believe that promoting the recognition of what happened, that is what the Truth Commission is achieving, interviewing all the actors of the conflict, it's that bring peace and coexistence in the territories. And it will contribute to build the foundations for the no repetitions. That is what it's the end of these truth commissions. We don't want in Colombia a new armed conflict that involves different actors. But this will not be able to achieve if we don't have social justice in our territories. Because right now, the communities are victimized because they are in the middle of the actions of the criminal groups, gangs, gangs that are involved with narco traffic, because they are taking advantage of the absence of the state. And if we don't have the time to listen to the truth that each part of the conflict has to say, and I do believe that the most close to the truth is the one that is being told by the victims, not the perpetrators, because, or at least in Colombia, each of these perpetrators has a specific interest in have a reduced, how you say, if you can help me please, in Spanish, condena. The imputation of the crimes, the closer to the truth is the one that has the victims. But they already has found their own peace through different resources. And I would like to show you, if you allow me, a work that women in the Montes de Maria have done through a really special social leader that has won a lot of prizes, and she calls Juana, Alicia Ruiz, and she's part of the Tejedoras de Mapujan. And that was a town that was mobilized from their territories by force. And through the years, they have been founding justice, really fighting with the institutionality to get what they need and what they deserve for has been moved from their town. And they have found peace in these kind of pieces. This piece is really different from the one that you can see.
Also als eine Form des Empowerment, oder was gehört in
Is this a kind of empowerment, or what belongs to justice? Is it a kind of reconciliation with one's own empowerment, or how could you say that?
I actually don't have I actually don't have a piece right now that talks about the violence acts. Oh, I'm sorry. But this one, if you see, there is more peaceful. And it's because these women, not only in Montes de Maria, but in other parts of Colombia, has developed an own methodology to bring peace to their own stories. They were silenced for a long time. Nobody believes them, even that the facts were there, even that the journalists were showing them by TV news, by newspapers, by the radio station, even that we all knew what happened. Nobody believed that that was really true, because the violent acts were so awful, the same as Chile or Argentina. They were so awful, so disturbing for everyone who hasn't been there, that we prefer to just, like the monkeys, put your arms here, here, and here. So they have developed this with their own abilities. They have developed this kind of tools to find justice through this, to communicate to the world. And I think that they have found a very nice tool to be heard by the truth commissioner, to the politicians, to the journalists, to the world, because it's better to see this covering the Justice Palace that watch women or social groups, at least in Colombia. Not saying the same thing in Chile or Argentina, because they have a different social movement, it's strong social movements. But in Colombia, the social movements has been catalogized with the left side of politics. And because the guerrilla was the left side, sometimes people didn't want to listen that message. I don't know if I've been clear. I'm so sorry.
Ja. Wow, auf jeden Fall kam es gut rüber.
Yes, that was really understandable, and I understand what you mean when you say that it's necessary to listen to the victims and to give victims the tools with which they can express themselves and be heard. Salome, I haven't asked you yet. Maybe you can also make our listener happy. We're talking about justice and what justice means. We've heard that it's necessary to get to reach social justice, to listen to victims. But what else belongs to justice, in your eyes, in your opinion?
Well, I would like to pick up on the topic of reparation, because I think it's a very important aspect. Once the sentences are ruled, in our country we were lucky enough to have this for the past 14, 15 years, and sort of uninterrupted process of justice in the criminal courts, courts of law, that imprisoned the perpetrators. But after that, once you have the sentence, what is left to be done in terms of justice? So reparation to the victims comes in different forms. As mentioned before, the economic reparation is a part of that, and it's a public policy, going back to the first statement, to the opening statement that we had. So reparation is part of that justice or social justice that we're aiming for. So not only to the victims, but also to the relatives of the disappeared, and to those who were political detainees and victims of forced disappearance that then were released from the camps, from the detention centers, from the clandestine detention centers, and for the children born in captivity. Also, there's a process of reparation, but also another set of policies that help us achieve that a more complete sense of justice. Not only that we get in a court of law, such as the dishonorably discharged from the military of those involved in the dictatorship or in state terrorism, or in any kind of act against democracy. That's also very important, that these things are no longer tolerated in our democracy, and any military member who decides to act against democracy will be discharged dishonorably and removed from any award, mention, recognition they have achieved during their career. And also the promotion of human rights and the truth and justice and memory through education, through formal education in schools, in high school, secondary schools. That's another means, from my perspective, that's another means of justice, because it helps you create the next generation of citizens who will speak up whenever they see injustice, whenever they see their rights or their neighbors' rights are being trespassed. So I believe justice comes in many different forms, in many different shapes, once judicial justice, court justice has been achieved.
Ja, ich würde sagen, das ist schon ein ganz wunderbares.
Well, this was nearly an excellent final wrap-up, actually, because it matches exactly with all these different set of measures which are needed to really come to terms and to promote your cause, to listen to the victims and to give means and tools to the victims, their families, to express themselves, the social justice, education, all what you said. I really thank you so much for all these insights you three gave us tonight, all these impulses we got tonight. And I wish to all of us that that we managed to implement all these important costs. Thank you for having been with us. Thanks again also to our interpreters of the interpreters in Berlin, Susanne and Karsten in Berlin, who were well interpreting and accompanying here our international talk and gave us their voices so that we were able to have a fruitful exchange here. I invite you all warmly on the 12th of April to join in when we have the next session of the Truth and Justice Commission, which was set up in South Africa to deal with the apartheid, which was kind of inspired by the Chilean model of the commission. So we continue with this context and we'll deal with transitional justice in Africa. We Right Connect probably with a lot of questions we touched today, and would be glad if you would join in again. So I wish you all the best. Have a nice evening. Goodbye from Berlin.